This Harold Cohen mosaic is so wakey, and I always thought.
Coordinated with the wall. And the book. And the book.
Yeah, it's auspicious, definitely.
Can just be a coincidence. But it's all coincidence.
Coincidence, control, organization. It just opened back up earlier this week.
Oh, yeah.
Peruse those as we wait. Yeah, exactly. We're meeting at 9 a.m. Well, I brought them for the Q&A part, so I might at 9:30 I might need them back. Okay. I'm trying to disclose. Yeah.
You're the power source.
Yeah.
I'll take it first.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Your podcast.
Kim always kind of nice to meet you. Doesn't really doesn't like to connect. Yeah.
Hey, Robert,
How did you get down?
Really?
They locked the doors.
oh,
We broke in.
someone in this group let me in and then I let Mary in, but should I go down there and just wait for
Actually, I
people?
understand at the end.
I think it might work. Might get going.
Should I go down and wait for people?
No, I don't know.
No?
Mark is part of the departments of his school.
Laura? Can she hear us?
She's muted.
She's trying to talk now.
She's trying to talk, but can you unmute her?
I don't think I'm controlling the Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
Are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Here's Robert Jackson.
Let me guess Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm trying this again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So now I'm looking for.
You said yes, right?
so let's try.
Oh, no, I got it now.
Oh, okay, you got it now? Perfect. Because otherwise I was gonna suggest.
Or can you say something so I can tell if I can hear you?
Hi Laura, can you hear me?
Yes, that's great. Okay, oh, perfect, thank you.
Okay.
I'm expecting a couple more people. I'll start in a minute. I'm just gonna put some water in this.
Laura? Oh, you're muted again, okay.
I think I can talk. It's nice to see you, Robert.
Oh, yes, how are you?
Good.
Yeah?
Yeah, Felix is okay. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but here I am.
Well, it's a very good connection, it's almost as if.
Hi, Robert.
Hello, Laura.
Hello, I'm sorry not to be there in person, but glad to be here anyway.
So, I think we can start because we're Are we missing anyone? It's
Well,
10
my
after
dad went
9.
down to see if the front door was still locked.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right, okay. Well, then we'll wait for him. Your English department, had a copy of that
Oh, good.
civilization, I tell you.
Yes, no, I'm glad you caught
9
it.
a.m., I didn't know how I was gonna get through.
Downstairs, yes.
Okay, so no one else? All right, I think that we can start, Laura and I are the dissertation advisors for Corey. And of course, Margaret is here as well as a member of the committee, and we're here not for an oral exam, but for a dissertation defense. It's almost like marking the occasion. Congratulations for any person who finishes a dissertation is a hero of sorts, because it really takes a lot of commitment, and we're delighted to gather here together to hear what Corey has to say to us. And the first hour will be, he will make a presentation, and then there'll be half-hour Q&A with the members of the audience who are not on the committee, and then the committee will withdraw with Corey to deliberate for the second hour. So, Corey, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to the public portion of my defense at 9 a.m. Robert already went through the logistics, so I'm going to skip that. Just a few thanks. Thanks to my committee, thanks to Robert, thanks to Mark for all the feedback you've given, thanks to my dad for traveling from Seattle and giving a lot of encouragement and feedback. I am going to do this for 30 minutes, not 20 minutes, so 10 minutes behind. So, my dissertation traces the influence of James Joyce's 1939 novel Finnegan's Wake on the thought and literature of the American psychedelic counterculture. I don't know if everyone's familiar with Finnegan's Wake. It's a very bizarre, difficult, notorious text. The extreme weirdness of the wake and the mind-altering challenge of trying to make any sense of it is the theme of my first chapter. My second chapter is also about Finnegan's Wake and the pharmacology of Finnegan's Wake and psychedelic themes in it. Today, I'm going to discuss the wake last and move in reverse order. I'm going to spend a lot of time just discussing some of my favorite material from the American psychedelic reception of Finnegan's Wake. So I'm going to start in post-60s California and move backwards in time and space, passing through 1950s Boston and approaching the wake as the kind of center of the cyclone. I used Brancusi's symbol of Joyce to give this kind of spiral vortical character of Finnegan's Wake. You can picture it kind of starting in the middle and emanating out in these waves of influence. Okay. So moving backwards has the benefit of going from easier to harder material, with the wake being the hardest. And I think there's a number of people here who are going to want to discuss the wake, so that can spill over into the Q&A. But I do want to get to the wake before the Q&A, so I'm going to go through everything else pretty fast. I'm just going to mostly be reading. So to begin, in the relatively recent past, and even in the present, if you search today on the internet or on YouTube for Finnegan's Wake, seeking maybe a lecture, introducing it, one of the first things you'll find, if not the first, is Terence McKenna's lecture, Surfing on Finnegan's Wake. I found an image of the cassette tape, but it's on the internet. Recorded at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur in 1995. And right at the beginning of this lecture, which I think is the most popular introduction to Finnegan's Wake, maybe by a lot now, McKenna states, Finnegan's Wake is two things clearly, psychedelic and eschatological. I'm going to skip eschatological, but he goes on to say, by psychedelic, I mean that all the boundaries are dissolved. It's a fascinating lecture with a lot of parts and elements, well worth appreciating in full, but I'm only mentioning it at the outset for McKenna's starting premise, which is the first thing many people will hear nowadays when trying to get acquainted with the wake, that it's psychedelic. Surfing on Finnegan's Wake. Now, Terence McKenna was, and became even more so after his early death in 2001, the world's leading advocate for and performing philosopher of psychedelics. He's also responsible for disseminating mushroom cultivation techniques. So on many levels, he's responsible for the psychedelic movement in the post-60s. In the words of astrobiologist Bruce Damer, McKenna revalorized the psychedelic experience after the crash, suppression, and ridicule of the post-60s period. I consider him the quintessential counterculture intellectual, albeit very eccentric and in some ways ridiculous. And at the center of McKenna's strange genius and mesmerizing bard-like charisma was his connection to Finnegan's Wake. He often alluded to the wake in speeches describing his experiences on psilocybin mushrooms and DMT, dimethyltryptamine. He would refer to the wake to find words to describe the strange space he went to on DMT and what he called the elf-infested megaspace, where these elves were beings made of language or music that was constantly transforming, and the elves were made of this musical language. His descriptions of that often sound like Finnegan's Wake, and he often explicitly references Finnegan's Wake at the climaxes of his psychedelic phenomenologies. The wake first appeared in McKenna's work in the late 60s in a Neoplatonic treatise, Post-Electric Thought, written in Berkeley, where the wake represents a solution to the world political emergencies of the nuclear age. It also represents a preview of an approaching post-historic hyperspace and hypertime, and a word blurb concretization of the one, Neoplatonic terminology. Most striking of all is the wake's presence in the primal scene of McKenna's career in 1971, the so-called experiment at La Chorrera. And I made an AI image of the experiment at La Chorrera. This was a prolonged breakthrough experience in the Colombian rainforest involving lots of mushrooms and other naturally occurring hallucinogens, from which McKenna received his vocation and kept talking about his whole career. The Wake was the only book Terence brought upriver in search of naturally occurring hallucinogens with which to test a set of wild, Gnostic, psycho-biopharmaceutical theories involving the spiritualization of the body, the evolution of mankind, and the end of history. At the peak of the experiment, Terence's heavily mushroomed brother, on the verge of a shamanic psychosis that would last several weeks, and also under the influence of Terence's wake whispering, anointed a rooster and hen as James and Nora Joyce, and argued that Finnegan's Wake, quote, represented the most complete understanding yet achieved of the relation of mind to time and space, of mind to time and space. Joyce was overseeing this corner of God's universe, and in a later memoir about the incident, Terence wrote that Joyce was in and acting through everything at La Chorrera, and the experiment ended with Terence experiencing a direct flyby of a UFO. So that's an AI-generated image of the mushrooms and the UFO divine contact experience with Joyce looming over everything. In the book in which the McKennas first theorized the results of this experiment, The Invisible Landscape, which McKenna called his magnum opus and was one of Jerry Garcia's favorite books, ends with the Wake quote, which he uses to predict the end of time in 2012. That 2012 end date of history was predicted by a mathematical divination technique McKenna developed in the book called the time wave, which also showed that, quote, the period over which Joyce forged the Wake, 1922 to 1939, corresponded to the breakthrough period of the experiment at La Chorrera in 1971. I'm going to explain the mathematics of that, but this theory of the waves of time. So During the experiment, Terence wrote that he and his brother had accessed the DNA holographic library of the interspecies collective unconscious. And all what's hidden in Finn's midden was scratched out by us in the Amazon in La Chorrera. Okay, so much for McKenna, and well, some of this is just fresh on my mind because the first biography of McKenna came out last week, Stranger Tractor, from which I learned some of that information. So now going on to Timothy Leary, McKenna's predecessor as a psychedelic hierophant, popularizer of psychedelics. Leary held a pre-mortem wake for himself. Before he died, he held a wake for himself, at which he read from Finnegan's Wake. In the early 70s, when Leary was in trouble with the law and eventually got out of jail, he went into the witness protection program under the pseudonym James Joyce, which we have a photo of his witness protection program document. This vignette, going undercover as James Joyce, concludes Leary's second autobiography, Flashbacks, at the beginning of which we learn Leary's career also began with Joyce. After leaving West Point Academy, Leary read Ulysses and, quoting from his autobiography, "My brain was permanently damaged. Joyce wittily, recklessly fissioned the structure of language. Change in the structure of thought would inevitably follow. In the decades to come, I spent much time analyzing how Joyce stripped words from their prudish structures and let them spin like charged particles." And he says reading Joyce was part of his training for the psychedelic experience. In his first autobiography, because he wrote two, High Priest, Leary inserted Finnegan's Wake quotes into an account of an early mushroom trip with Jack Kerouac and William Burroughs. This point is a little speculative, but in the mid-60s, Leary founded and promoted a mass psychedelic religion with the catchphrase, "Turn on, tune in, drop out." And as best as I can tell, that phrase comes from Finnegan's Wake, because Leary got the phrase from Marshall McLuhan, who sang it to him as an ad jingle, "Turn on, tune in, drop out." And McLuhan read the Wake daily, like a Bible, and in the Wake there is this musical motif that goes tune in, tune on, etc. It takes various forms, but I think McLuhan likely took that psychedelic ad jingle from Finnegan's Wake, which became the catchphrase of Leary's religion. McLuhan would be a fascinating topic in his own right. In a televised interview, he opined that LSD may be the lazy man's Finnegan's Wake. Leary loved literature, mainly Joyce, but he also loved Thomas Pynchon, and especially Gravity's Rainbow, 1971. We're worried about that. In Gravity's Rainbow, the protagonist, Slothrop, a U.S. Army lieutenant investigating Nazi scientific esoterica, is monitored by a figure named Stephen, a la Joyce's artist hero, Stephen Dedalus, who studies, Slothrop's monitor studies ancient Norse and Germanic sigils. His wife is named Nora, and he walks on the beach with Strand at dawn. Also throughout Gravity's Rainbow, Pynchon, there's many waking things about Gravity's Rainbow, but one is that the acronym CIA appears in different guises like HCE and ALP in Finnegan's Wake. So for instance, CIA appears as Committee on Incandescent Anomalies, Chemical Instrumentality for the Abnormal, Committee on Idiopathic Archetypes. The character Stephen also thinks he has a radio implant in his skull, which is a Wake motif. Now going back to the primal scenes of the 60s counterculture. When Allen Ginsberg was given the chance to take CIA LSD in Menlo Park in 1959, his plan for the session included listening to an LP of Joyce reading from Finnegan's Wake during the LSD session. And these pictures are from the Stanford Ginsberg papers. There's the notebook, 1959 San Francisco trip. On the second page there, you see him getting the contact info for this psychiatrist Joe Adams, Menlo Park, LSD. We got the LSD from Harold Abramson, CIA, MK Ultra, head of the psychochemistry for the CIA. And then on the right, you have a list of records that he plans. At the top is James Joyce, along with Dylan Thomas. Now there are two records of Joyce reading. There's another one, much less famous record of Joyce reading from Ulysses. I think it's almost certain that he was planning to have the record of Joyce reading from chapter 4, ALP, means wait. So, also I love this. So it's like he's listing the records he wants to listen to, and then above it says stroboscopic light hypnosis. So you're gonna have like a strobe light. Okay. Soon afterwards, this was in 1959, soon afterwards, the Beat Generation superstar Neil Cassidy joined in the same Menlo Park CIA LSD studies. Cassidy was the star of Jack Kerouac's On the Road and other novels in Kerouac's Deluo's Legend, which was also heavily Joycean and based on, inspired by Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses. In 1960, Cassidy, who lived in this area, heard about an up-and-coming Stanford graduate novelist, Ken Kesey, who had written One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And Cassidy showed up at Kesey's house in Menlo Park speaking what sounded to Kesey like Finnegan's Wake played fast forward. That was Kesey describing the incident in the Paris Review. That Cassidy showed up at his house speaking this crazy glossolalia that sounded like Finnegan's Wake played fast forward. And by Kesey's account, this was the turning point in his life when he chose the wild road instead of the more conventional path of a novelist that might have made him into kind of a John Updike. So at that point, upon hearing this Wakean crazy language from Cassidy, Kesey chose the wild road. He started writing the sprawling Wakean novel, Sometimes a Great Notion, which centers around a fictional river in Oregon called Wakonda. Fictional river called Wakonda. In the town of Wakandaaga, the fictional town. The novel features this looping structure where the end circles back to the beginning, and it's symbolized by the river, just like in the Wake. And it centers on a very Wakean brother rivalry that mirrors the Shem and Sean relationship, especially Book 2, Chapter 1 of Finnegan's Wake. Published in 1963, Sometimes a Great Notion is a masterpiece that Kesey somehow managed to pull off while being the charismatic center, along with Cassidy, of a community of psychedelic experimenters and artists known as the Merry Pranksters, on the Pranksters' cross-country bus trips and at their so-called acid tests, where the Grateful Dead played their first shows. Cassidy's Wakean glossolalias were a constant fixture or element, background tone. You can see this in footage of the bus trip. Cassidy is always on the intercom talking in this wild Joycean stream of consciousness. So I don't think it would be too much to claim that the entire early psychedelic ethos of the Deadhead scene and the Merry Pranksters was from the beginning infused with Wakean language, bathed in this Joycean stream of consciousness. So to summarize, for all these psychedelic figures, the Wake is the central reference point, and kind of becomes a way of life. Maybe give it as almost a sacramental source of inspiration or just constant reference point. So at one point, the dissertation project was supposed to just be about the figures I just covered, but while doing research, I researched a much wider range of topics, and I became much more interested in the pre-1960s intellectual historical background of the psychedelic movement, as well as Joyce's texts themselves, read retrospectively in view of their enormous importance for grounding the psychedelic movement. And so those two things ended up taking up most of the dissertation. Now, so as far as the first one, pre-60s intellectual historical background of the psychedelic movement. I discovered an underappreciated figure who was both crucial to understanding the 60s counterculture and, fortunately, also merited inclusion in the Finnegan's Wake reception history, Henry Alexander Murray. There's a photo of him in his older age. I'll dwell on Murray a little bit now in part because he's the most MTLian, most interdisciplinary of my subjects. He started as a medical doctor, then became a psychologist, then a sociologist, then through the period I studied, he turned to literature as a kind of final recourse or remedy for the problems he had studied in other disciplines. Moving from the 60s back to the 50s and 40s into Murray's world takes us into I think a rather scary world in which the drug du jour is amphetamines, and the consciousness movement of the 60s kind of dissolves into this background of apocalyptic existential dread. I heard of Murray first as Timothy Leary's supervisor at Harvard. He was Timothy Leary's direct overseer. He was the leading figure in Leary's field, personality psychology, and in flashbacks, his autobiography, Leary recounts on his first day at Harvard, he walked around with Murray and they went into a Swedenborgian chapel, and Leary felt like he was being initiated into the Cambridge Illuminati. As I looked more into Murray, a fascinating figure emerged, a medical and organic chemistry student who, while working for the Rockefeller Medical Foundation, met a friend of Anna Freud, Freud's daughter, who got him interested in Carl Jung, who he then met through the Rockefeller Medical Foundation, and somehow seamlessly transitioned into being a psychologist. He had been an organic chemist, and just met Carl Jung and just became a psychologist. Murray's brilliant literary style of writing earned him the reputation of being an heir to William James at Harvard, where he also played a key role in the adoption of depth psychology in America. His high status was reflected by the fact that during World War II, the founding father of the modern U.S. intelligence community, William Donovan, hired him to lead the OSS psychology staff. The OSS was the CIA during World War II. And after the war, Murray turned his expertise in personality theory towards the production of a new man, kind of a transhuman personologies, what we call it. He talks about how all the human sciences need to turn to this task, this emergency, this urgent task to remake humanity. In a manifesto called America's Mission, he discusses what he calls the threat of absolute weapons, nuclear weapons, as well as chemical weapons. He says that with the threat of absolute weapons, the human sciences need to kind of mount this counter-absolute revolution in redesigning humanity and intervening in human being to bring about a kind of national ego death. Finnegan's Wake is going to come in a second. I found at Harvard a set of papers that Murray wrote in the 50s that I was told no one ever looks at, even though to me it seems like clearly the most important work Murray did. In the 50s, he got interested in designing a mythology and creating a new religion that would bring about this transformation of human nature, with America leading the way for a global transformation of humanity. He wrote a novel in which he expounded some of these ideas. These are bad photos, but the first chapter of Murray's novel is called Vico, and describes him being possessed by the spirit of Vico, quite literally possessed by the spirit of Vico in Italy. Vico being Joyce's the philosopher of Finnegan's Wake. The narrator of Murray's novel is possessed and given his vocation by Vico. Then, later in the novel, when we meet a prototype of the new man, a prototype of the new man, this is a character named Petrovsky, This character is an aficionado of Finnegan's Wake. So Petrovsky, a model of the new man, and this kind of saintly figure, is a Finnegan's Wake. He likes to quote Finnegan's Wake. Throughout the 50s, Murray worked to dissolve the disciplinary boundary between psychology and religion in order to reverse the decline of the latter, and ultimately circled around the idea of a book that would trigger and guide a mass conversion. So he goes through this over and over in these amphetamine, these speedy brainstorms about how in order to abolish war, there needs to be a world government and a world police force. But in order to get that, we need a transformation of human nature to make people amenable to this idea of a world government. And in order to transform human nature, we need a book, a world testament, to center a religion that will bring about this mass conversion. And in one of his 50 speeches, he calls for the composition of a book, a sort of philosophical history of the world with multifarious components, a love-engendered book embodying the erotic, ecstatic religion Murray called synergism or synthesism, emphasizing the unity of opposites and the dissolution of boundaries. This already sounds like the way. And in the late 50s, Murray collaborates with the two great Wake scholars of the day, Joseph Campbell and Marshall McLuhan, to further spell out what the World Testament of this book would look like. And Murray starts looking to the Beat generation as the group of writers who have to be converted into this new religion, and then convert the masses with a testament that he says would be more radical and revolutionary than the anti-biological Sermon on the Mount. So this new religion has to be more powerful than Christianity. And so it's really remarkable that the Beat generation writers are expected to become like messiahs who are more charismatic than Christ. I'm skimming over this because it all comes together in a momentous, legendary 1960 speech by Murray inaugurating the International Congress of Psychology in Copenhagen, which one attendee described as issuing the warrant for the 60s Cultural Revolution. Murray took mushrooms before this speech with Leary. He begins the speech by saying he's going to take the audience into that strange to us old world of mind, where adventurers may gaze with more wonder than conquistadors roving through the Aztec glades of Mexico. He narrates a mushroom trip in which he was guided by an angel through an apocalyptic scenario and then shown how it could have been averted. And in the climax of the speech, he starts talking about the World Testament and the literary work that would be found this new religion. He calls it the work in progress. I'm running out of time, I'm not going to read all this, but I think he's clearly thinking about the Wake when he describes the religious scripture of synergism, or what he calls synergism, this new religion. He says that this book has to be full of graphic models, mythic parables, emotive metaphors, archetypal symbols, personifications, poetic speech as in the Bible. The religion of this new world. This is in the mushroom vision, and this angel is taking him into the future, and the angel shows him an overview of this future society where there is a festival. The society is centered on a festival, and this book is the center of the festival. It's kind of a liturgy of this festival. He says, the religion of this new world is marked by numerous salutary rites and festivals which might be described in your old language as ways of cheering, checking, channeling, and controlling the wildest dispositions of the id. A spectacular religious festival. And then Murray's speech ends with the angel starting to speak this kind of gibberish glossolalia. The angel embarked on a strange, disjointed discourse about the riddles and mysteries of this new religion, but I could not follow him at all, and I woke up. So I think the Wake is heavily present in Murray's vision of this religion, and he was working with Joseph Campbell and Marshall McLuhan this time, so these are clear references to the Wake. Murray's vision of the festival religion sounds to me like a Grateful Dead concert, maybe Burning Man, but the Grateful Dead concert, which Joseph Campbell called the antidote to the atom bomb. Terence McKenna, commenting on Campbell's comment, called Dead shows mini reflections of the real party, the real Dionysian revel at the end of time. So, I only have a few minutes left. I think it's amazing that all these exposés of CIA drug research in the 50s keep coming out. They just keep coming out. All these MK Ultra exposés. A new one came out this week. Liam Nakagawa told me about Project Mind Control by John Lyle, published by a prestigious press. Also, David Chase, the creator of The Sopranos, is doing a new series about MK Ultra and CIA drug research. And it's just amazing to me that with all this interest and excavation of the occult CIA scientific background of the 60s drug culture, no one has even noticed Murray, much less appreciated him as the main figure in this regard. And in my opinion, Finnegan's Wake is at the center of Murray's project to transform America, leading into the 1960s counterculture. Now, as for revisiting the Wake in light of this extraordinary reception in the American counterculture, as I said, there are 2 chapters on the Wake in the dissertation, the first of which describes an initial reaction to the text and the difficulties of reading a text at all in which all the boundaries are dissolved. That chapter of the dissertation becomes kind of a philosophical meditation on reading cognition and intelligibility. The second chapter explores psychedelic and counterculture themes in the Wake in the context of Joyce's broader vision of pharmacology in society, which, summarizing really quickly, is kind of pharmacology kind of is a central symbol of Joyce's vision of society as a whole and of modern technology, with a lot in common with Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. I'm going to go a little over time. So this ambitious reading of Joyce's pharmacology takes up 60 pages and covers lots of parts of Finnegan's Wake, which I can't go into detail about, but maybe this could take us into the Q&A. Vastly oversimplifying things, I'll just boil it down to a couple of elements. First of all, the artist character in Finnegan's Wake, Shem, well, one element is the psychedelic, countercultural character of Shem, the artist character. And the second element is Shem's relationship with a doctor who is kind of a rival, a foil, a double, or a twin, who at various points in the Wake is trying to dope the artist, or subdue him, or vaccinate him, or neutralize him with drugs. So there's these dueling pharmacologies. There's the artist, and then there's this controlling doctor. It has been 30 minutes, so maybe I will just cut it off there. I want to mention just these pictures of Joyce looking like a doctor or something. I just want to mention one passage of Finnegan's Wake that discusses the artist, Shem, who is shown writing a boundary-dissolving manuscript that is more than a book, but a kind of viral, fleshly hyper-object blurring the whole world together into a dividual chaos. He's writing by the light fantastic of his nose's glow, G-N-O-S, gnosis, by the light fantastic of his nose's glow. I think fantastic is spelled P-H-A-N-T. I think it's a reference to the pharmacologist Lewis Lewin's 1931 book, Fantastica, about largely about hallucinogens, which Aldous Huxley had reviewed in English in 1931. And among the items in the artist's house in that scene of Finnegan's Wake, we see scopolamina. That's an Italianization and respelling of scopolamine, a drug that Joyce in fact took. I didn't know what scopolamine was until I asked people in San Francisco, and they said it's actually way more hallucinogenic than most hallucinogens. It'll actually make you see things that aren't real, and it can be quite dangerous. It's a shamanic drug. It's not really like a hippie drug. It's shamanic. You might, meet demons or evil gods, or it's used entheogenically by indigenous peoples of America. Joyce referred to it as a truth serum. And the spelling of scopolamine in this passage I just mentioned, scopialamina, suggests an explosion of the soul. Sciopia in Italian, does that explode or detonate? Sciopia, an explosion of the soul. We're told that Joyce took scopolamine for eye surgeries to dilate his pupils, which is a horrifying scenario. Having little knives plunged into your psychedelically dilated pupils. On the other hand, the passage just mentioned seems to include the drug in the artist's personal paraphernalia. And a limerick Joyce wrote about scopolamine in 1926 suggests quite a positive evaluation of scopolamine. It's a very weird limerick that I have up there. A cough mixture scopolamine, its equal has never been seen. It makes state to be common with Pharaoh, laugh and leap like a salmon, and his mummy hopscotch on the green. So, to me it sounds like he likes scopolamine. And in other parts of the wake, the artist character takes drugs for metaphysical, Neoplatonic vision questing, or inspiration, and or social climbing. At one point he goes to America, where he seems to take peyote. And I'm just going to end it there with the note that this artist is in a tense rivalry with a doctor who uses drugs for control, and I argue at length in the manuscript that we should understand this artist character in terms of Joyce's real life friend / maybe rival, Salsker Gunn, who was the vice president of the Rockefeller Foundation and a leading figure in public health. And I know there's people in the audience who know about that, so maybe we can talk about it in the Q&A.
Yeah, we can follow up on some of these things in
Yeah.
the Q&A.
So that was 35 minutes. Thank you for listening.
Very good. That's
Salsker Gunn. And the final picture of Joyce, where he was asked to pose someone asked him just make a pose that reflects how you feel, and that was his pose.
So like the guests have priority here in this half hour of discussion, so Grant, go ahead.
Okay, I guess I have two questions to start, and then I'll have more questions if nobody has any others. So on the back of My Finnegan's Wake, it says from Harold Bloom, Joyce's masterpiece, if aesthetic merit were ever again to center the canon, Finnegan's Wake would be as close to our chaos could come to the heights of Shakespeare or Dante. So I take the term aesthetic merit from Harold Bloom of My Finnegan's Wake. And then I'll take the term fecundity from Michael Fried's paper, 3 American Paper, Painters, where he assesses the legacy of painters by how generative they were for further generations. And so I guess my question is, besides sometimes a great notion, and probably Henry Murray, so bracketing Murray and sometimes a great notion, how do you assess the aesthetic merit of the American psychedelic literary movement? Was Finnegan's Wake vegan? Did it have like generative results? Or is there not much aesthetic merit to the kind of patina of Wakeys that they were adopting?
Not many of these writers actually went into Wakeys. There's books that are influenced by Finnegan's Wake. Sometimes a great notion is structurally influenced by Finnegan's Wake, but there's not really any like linguistic experimentation in Sometimes a Great Notion. In Gravity's Rainbow, there's almost no Wakean language. There's one scene where he uses weird Joycean pun, kind of a climactic moment, which I think is a pun that has aesthetic merit. But the writer, the American writer, who wasn't actually psychedelic, and this is strange because the American writer who most directly imitated Finnegan's Wake's language was Kerouac, Jack Kerouac, in some lesser known texts that he wrote in the late 50s. One of them is called Old Angel Midnight. Another one's called Book of Dreams. And I think the aesthetic merit of those texts is pretty low, pretty bad, actually. I don't know, maybe that's really unfair, but it seems like Kerouac just kind of like uses like saying random words.
Pathetic to try to imitate, or could anyone possibly, follow Joyce and not, be really deficient by comparison?
Yeah, I know you have said that Beckett's whole style was, Beckett's minimal style was a recognition of the impossibility of imitating Joyce.
Yeah, Joyce had taken that to the utmost extreme, and therefore Beckett went in the opposite direction, reducing the word to the essential minimalist resonance.
Okay, so then one other question, and then we can go. So you mentioned this bag of psychedelics that Shem carries around, including scopolamina, or he has
It's
an
in his apartment.
inventory,
in his house.
inventory of substances.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, besides scopolamine, which you have presented nice evidence for, what other psychedelics do you think James Joyce biographically encountered in order from your strongest, best evidence to your just most vague hunch?
There's another passage in Finnegan's Wake about Shem, the artist, where it says, and this passage is in the voice of a critical, judgmental figure, maybe his brother Sean. Sean is largely criticizing the artist and saying he's feral and a madman and all this. And he describes the artist writing. First he says, Shem is fast asleep in his chair on his pilgrimace of child horrid. Pilgrimace, P-I-L-L, grimace. It's a reference to Byron's Pilgrimage of Childe Harold. So he's on some kind of pill trip. In that same passage, though, to get to your question, it says that Shem caught the Europicculus, and went into the Society of Jewses, Jewses. Shem caught the Europicculus and went into the Society of Jewses. And then right after that it says, MD made his ante-mortem for him. Europicculus is the scientific name for ergotism, which is a horrible disease caused by infection by the hallucinogenic mold that grows on wheat that was it seems to cause hallucinations. It's largely regarded as a disease, a horrible disease, but in the psychedelic era, a lot of people theorize, including the inventor of LSD, Albert Hofmann, he claimed that ergotism and ergot were the active ingredient in the ancient Greek mystery religion at Eleusis. So there's this passage where Shem is accused of having caught this psychedelic fungal disease. But the passage MD made his ante-mortem for him, which comes right after that, to me that points back to Ulysses, where Stephen the artist's medical friend, Buck Mulligan, who's an MD, he doses Stephen. I think this is just clearly the plot of Ulysses. If you read from a psychedelic point of view, Buck Mulligan, the medical doctor, doses Stephen with a drug that gives him a hallucinogenic trip in the Circe chapter, and then Stephen ends up blacking out. And it's implied that Buck is trying to initiate Stephen into this into Greek culture to revive this dour Catholic Irish culture with Greek culture. I think it's very plausible to understand Buck Mulligan as having dosed Stephen with a ergot distillate.
Take some more questions.
There's a lot to say about that, but yeah, I think Joyce may have been aware of efforts to distill ergot well before LSD was officially discovered in 1939, and an early edition of Finnegan's, an early
Yeah. So
he
we have,
mentions distilling Eleusis, and then he also mentions the Hallucinian Via, the Eleusinian road, the road to Eleusis. Joyce writes it as Hallucinian, and that's completely against the official history, which is that only in the 60s did people start thinking that Eleusis was a hallucinogen based on ergot. So that's to answer your question. Maybe ergot, some kind of early distillate of ergot.
Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, fantastic. I caught that in the dissertation you ruminate on the magic of reading. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your engagement with the wake has transformed your mind as a reader.
Definitely has. Well, that takes me to the first chapter of the dissertation, which is really a description of the whole chapter is an answer to that question. The chapter is about how to read Finnegan's Wake. Is it abstractable to how to read in general? Maybe. Maybe Finnegan's Wake could train you to read or to understand a very complex world. But, there aren't other texts that are like Finnegan's Wake, so I don't know if Finnegan's Wake has changed the way I read other literature, to be honest. But I would say reading Finnegan's Wake has trained my tolerance for complexity and just understanding modernity. I have a friend, Ali Gamble, who's a scholar of modernism. He says, after 1930, history is completely unintelligible. Everything before that, you can understand it and write scholarly works about it. Culture, history made sense before, but there's some sort of cliff or cutoff where things get too complex. The processes of modernity just get too over hypertrophied, and that there's just no way you can understand. And maybe Finnegan's Wake is Finnegan's Wake exemplifies that over complexity, and it might help you just understand or tolerate the chaos of the 20th century and the 21st century.
The same thing happens in physics, really, with quantum mechanics. All of a sudden, things become incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Antonio.
In the psychedelic religion of Murray, and I guess you could extend it to the culture, the time. My impression is that there's a experience at the center of it, like part of this religion and some set of beliefs, but they have an experience.
Yeah.
What are the qualities of this experience, and does it appear in Finnegan's Wake?
The one thing that's notable about this religion is that there's really no talk of God in it, or of any kind of God. It's always about unities of opposites, and the paradigmatic image of the religion is marriage. In Murray's account, which is the unity of opposites. And yeah, more generally, that's the experience that characterizes the experience, this ecstatic experience that Murray wants to build the religion on, identifying with the opposite, maybe even becoming the opposite. What is most opposite to you? You become, or unite with, which for Murray was largely a political necessity for people of different nations to just completely embrace everyone in order to create the world government. But yeah, the center of the religion is this experience of ecstasy, of coming out of oneself and identifying with opposites. Does that answer to you? Yeah.
Yes.
I thought that was amazing.
Thank you.
So that's great. I am curious, when you first got interested in Joyce, and if you ever got to meet him, what would you ask him?
Oh, I would definitely ask him about scopolamine and the thought of Ulysses and Buck Mulligan, and yeah, it's, I don't know, there's a lot I would want to ask him, but I want to say about Joyce is that, something I want to say about Joyce is that he, approaching him from the perspective of the psychedelic reception and this kind of ecstatic, jubilant culture, drug use, Joyce probably would be not what you would expect in his personality. A lot of descriptions of Joyce make him seem like just like suffering a lot, having lots of medical problems, being very depressed, at times being quite misanthropic, kind of the opposite of Murray's religion, actually. There's a passage in one of Joyce's biographies where he's quoted as, someone quotes Samuel Beckett as saying that Joyce didn't love anyone except his family, and that when Joyce said that, it sounded to Beckett like Joyce was saying he didn't even like anyone except his own family. So I don't know what I would ask Joyce, but I would be really interested in just feeling out what he was like. And probably ask him what he thinks about what happened to his work in America. He also was pretty anti-American and like suspicious of America, as many Europeans were, I guess, were anti-Americanism.
Mike, and then Rita?
Yeah, regarding that sort of anti-American aspect of Joyce and Finnegan's Wake, I wonder if you could say a bit more about Selsker Gunn, the Rockefeller Foundation, and to what extent you think a picture emerges from Finnegan's Wake of America's role in the world.
Thank you. Yes. A picture emerges of America's role in the world. I don't know if there's any succinct way to argue this or to convince you that this goes on in Finnegan's Wake, but I guess I need to give a little more background on Gunn. Selsker Gunn was one of Joyce's closest friends in childhood in Dublin. Gunn's family was a very affluent family, like the Guinness family, the Jameson family and the Gunn family were like these three dynasties of the Dublin elite. And Gunn's father ran the Gaiety Theatre, which was like the biggest theatre in Ireland, which is still there. And then Gunn left Ireland in, I think it was in his teens. He left Ireland, went to America, enrolled in MIT, and just became part of the American power elite. He rose through the ranks. He became this big public health figure in Boston. He was actually one of the leading early figures in the field of public health. He became an American citizen. I think Joyce and he were completely estranged throughout this time. And by whatever, I don't know how this happened, but Joyce and Gunn just both became these kind of equal and opposite superstars of like intellectual leaders of the period. And both of them were Rockefeller. Joyce was also funded by Edith Rockefeller. So yeah, and Gunn became the vice president of the Rockefeller Foundation and moved back to Paris in order to work for the Rockefeller Foundation in Paris at the time when Joyce was living there and starting to write Finnegan's Wake. So I just felt I needed to say that to establish that Gunn actually was American, became an American, and was a, I don't know, like kind of a prelate, like a, Milton, you learn a lot about Milton's polemics against the priests and the prelates, who are these power players. How to convey though that Gunn takes on this aspect of a gigantic, kind of monstrous figure of America in Finnegan's Wake. I guess there are passages where Gunn appears, yeah, this might maybe the most succinct image. There's a passage where Gunn appears as Atlas, and he's holding the globe, and he's like turning the world towards its end, like an apocalyptic Atlas who's finishing, holding the entire world. Gunn is in this image, and I think there's a reference to the Rockefeller Foundation in that passage, but it also is the Rockefeller Center statue in New York where there's Atlas holding the world. As far as the sinister character of this, just over and over you get the sense that Gunn, or this Sean rival character, is trying to absorb everything and or control everything, and oftentimes trying to malevolently control the artist character. I don't want to lean too hard in that dark, monstrous interpretation of Gunn in America. I don't know if that's all Joyce felt about Gunn in America. And then the whole thing is complicated by Gunn's own book. Gunn wrote a book, a fictional little weird animal fable, Doings of Dinky, published 1936 or 7, in which the main character was a dog, and another main character was a fox. They seem to be best friends, and it seems to be Gunn identifying as Joyce's friend, and even saying that they are collaborators. Because in the book Doings of Dinky, the fox and the dog go on a pilgrimage together. They're working together for this royal, kind of a world government of animals, and they go on this magical mystery expedition together, and they open a business together. The fox character is definitely Joyce. He talks like Finnegan's Wake. That's actually an example of another literary text that uses Wakean language, like Gunn's book. In Doings of Dinky, the fox character speaks in this Wakean language. So I don't know what to make of all this. Gunn seems to want to be Joyce's friend, or to say that they're part of the same project. In Finnegan's Wake, Gunn appears more like a conspiring world controller, who you could think of Gunn in Finnegan's Wake in analogy to the character Mustafa Mond in Huxley's Brave New World, who's the world controller, who's the scientific oligarch who just runs the entire world from an office, using largely drugs.
So Corey, can we get one last question from the audience coming from the yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like a lot of these people or these figures that you're painting a portrait of, like they have utopian aspirations. They kind of seem to see themselves as bearers of a new creed, or at least a new way of life, or you know, and they're all somewhat interested in like psychedelics. But is there any sense in which this kind of self-perception or perception of like a historical sea change, and is there any sense in which that is like drawn from the wake, or does the wake indicate a certain epochal shift like that's occurring?
In Finnegan's Wake, does Joyce depict this epochal New Age kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. For one thing, the artist, as soon as you start trying to like say anything definite about Finnegan's Wake, you run into contradictions. But the artist is definitely bringing about a new world order where everything is blurred together, and it's like this global homogeneity, where everyone is like one body, and the text is this flesh that unifies the whole world. So maybe Shem himself is this New Age psychedelic figure. But I would say that the Gunn character, who's this medical imperialist social planner, he's also kind of a New Age scientific Brave New World kind of figure. And I don't know, they're rivals or enemies at times. Maybe they're both doing the same thing. There's also a lot in Finnegan's Wake about media and television and radio creating a new age, and kind of a reconstitution of society by television. Yeah. Hosty, Hosty in Finnegan's Wake Chapter 1 writes a song about a politician, social planner, who's like a progressive technocrat, and it's like this QAnon populist conspiracy. The song is this populist conspiracy about the progressive technocrat and how he's like, changing sexual mores and doing birth control and stuff. But is that what you meant, or are you thinking that Hosty himself is?
I guess the David Starr Jordan aspect that he's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He might even be referenced. Starr Jordan might be referenced in the description of Hosty.
Well, I think you all got an idea of what depth of complexity this book of Finnegan's Wake, and then in addition to that, the reception of it, and it's kind of these rhizomatic connections that go everywhere, and you can imagine why Corey's dissertation committee, in the midst of it, in the middle of his writing of this, we highly pessimistic that someone could pull off bringing together, synthesizing into a coherent kind of thesis all these various, I would say, decodings and recodings that are involved both in the text of Finnegan's Wake as well as his reception. So I hope you can join me in congratulating Corey on pulling this off. ask the people who are not on the committee to take their leave, and we will. Can we stay in this room just to keep?
We're supposed to
Yeah.
go.
I think we're already set up, and it'll save time if we just have our discussion here. Is that okay? Great. What's that? The room is set up.
So you have the next 4 hours, or not full